I've uploaded to this channel two videos. One, a short video on the work of Stanley Milgram, told from Milgram's own perspective. It's his film. The other is a feature film on the life of Milgram. It may be blocked in some countries. Stanley Milgram is probably best known for his 1961 experiment on obedience to authority. Every semester when I teach research methods, the Milgram experiment is always given as one that poses ethical challenges. Milgram was interested in the question of why and to what extent will people obey authority, and to what extent will they violate ethical norms in the name of authority. He was probably inspired by the Eichmann case in 1961. Adolf Eichmann was on trial, which also was the basis of Hannah Arendt's famous 1963 book, Eichmann in Jerusalem. And the question posed by the Eichmann case is, why would people do things like mass murder? Why would ordinary human beings engage in the Holocaust? And there are two main answers to this. One of them is that the German murder of the Jews was something that was specific to Germany and German culture. The other is that all of us, all human beings, are capable of monstrous acts under the right circumstances. Specifically under the circumstances of, are we in a situation where this appears to be the normal and the accepted thing to do, and are we in conformity with authority when we carry out monstrous acts? Milgram was initially inclined toward the first view, that the Holocaust was something that was unique to German culture, but his experiment was designed to see whether ordinary Americans might act in a similar way. And many people are familiar with this experiment. Basically, he set this up as a learning situation where they recruited people who were told they were going to be using negative reinforcement to encourage learning, and the subjects were told they were going to administer small electric shocks to supposed students, and in theory the students were the subjects of this experiment, but in actuality the supposed students were collaborators with Milgram. And the researcher directed the supposed teachers to deliver shocks whenever the putative students got answers wrong. The surprising outcome of this was that most of the teachers were quite willing to administer heavy doses of electricity, even when the subjects were screaming, supposedly screaming in pain and begging for it to stop. And the conclusion that Milgram drew from this was that people are quite willing to go along with ethically objectionable behavior when they believe that they're told to do this by an authority figure. Now, there are some questions about Milgram's research. Later on, some of the participants, some of the supposed teachers, apparently said that they realized what was going on, or at least suspected what was going on. So this artificial setup may not have been how people would normally react in such a situation. But Milgram's conclusion was quite similar to the conclusion that Hannah Arendt a bit later drew in Eichmann in Jerusalem, and that is that evil is often banal, that it results not from monstrous intent, but from a failure to think and a willingness to conform with authority. Now, regardless of whether or not Arendt was right, or whether or the validity of Milgram's experiment, this does pose the uncomfortable question of authority. To what extent will people do things when directed to do so by an authority figure, or when they believe that it is the accepted practice that they would not do if they consulted their own consciences? The Milgram experiment would suggest that authority is a danger, and I think it is. There is, though, another way to look at these things, and that is that authority is something that is unavoidable and is essential to ordered life, to people living together. Max Weber famously had characterized authority as legitimate power, that is, power that people were willing to accept. And the collapse of authority is often characterized as a crisis of legitimacy. So it is often the case that it isn't simply authority by itself that's a problem, but unrestrained authority, or the collapse of authority constrained by ordinary norms. You might say that when regular authority collapses, the demagogues step in. One way to interpret the events of January 6th in the United States is that many Americans who participated in the invasion of the U.S. Capitol were undergoing a crisis of legitimacy. They had come to question the legitimacy of their own government, the legitimacy of the experts, the authorities, and so the demagogues step in where constrained authority collapses. So I think that one of the things that the Milgram experiment should cause us to think about is, when is authority something that creates an ordered social life, and when is authority something that will push us beyond our normal bonds, our normal bounds? I would say that one of the things we should think about is whether or not authoritarian figures from the right or left dissolve our self-control, our self-constraints, in much the same way that an authority figure might do through conformity. So the question of conformity, I think, may be one of how do we steer our way through the skilla of unquestioning obedience and the charybdis of a collapse of authority that allows new authoritarian figures to step in who are not constrained by ordinary norms and values. So watch the videos and let me know what you think.